because without an active community, there's no development, there's no advancement in software, and technology moves so fast. If the software is not being updated and maintained, it'll be obsolete 1 or 2 years down the road.
And welcome to another Hacking Open Source Business Podcast episode. I'm here again with Avi. Avi, welcome.
Hello, hello. Good to be here as always.
And today we're joined by special guest star, Georg Link. Georg.
Hello. Thanks for having me. I'm doing great.
Now, I have been on your podcast before, so I figured it was just turnabout's fair play to have you come on. And maybe you could start by telling us a little bit about yourself. Just give us a little background.
I would love to, and thanks for inviting me. We had such a great conversation last time that I'm happy to continue that. I am originally from Germany, living in the US. So that's background. I live in Omaha, Nebraska, in the middle of nowhere, but I love it here. And more interesting is probably my journey into open source, which started when I was in high school, and I got a computer and internet, and I had friends who did awesome things, programming, and I was like, I want to do that too. And they introduced me to the world of open source and Linux, and I joined the openoffice.org community. I tested the German translation, the release before they came out. I helped with reorganizing the menus because it didn't make any sense from the English translation to the German and whatnot. Anyway, there was a lot of non-coding things that I did. Whoa, I have somewhere, I lost it. I have somewhere a DVD cover for the openoffice.org.
Oh, really? You have like the old
conference.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
Wow,
Okay.
wow.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's awesome.
And I designed it. I didn't actually go to the conference. I was the one who designed it. Anyway, I would have showed that to everyone, but I can not figure out where I put it right now.
That's okay. That's okay. But I mean, your journey to the open source started in that consumer space, helping out and saying like, oh, there isn't German translations. Let's start there, starting to get involved there. That's pretty cool. Now, you also have an unusual background because you actually grew up in a castle?
I grew up on the premise of a castle. My dad was the manager. Yes.
So
we lived in the
I didn't know that.
farmhouse.
That's awesome.
You lived in the farmhouse. So was it like a tourist place? Like your dad managed the castle as a tourist place, or is it like just for some family, or what?
It's an education institution for agriculture, where agricultural traders and farmers could come and learn about their trade. And while my dad was the manager there for, some 20 years, he also turned it into a hotel and event space. So we had everyone from the Chancellor of Germany to everyone there at some point for some event or another. It was really cool.
Is it still in operation?
Yes, the castle is still in operation.
So we could have an open source conference at Georg's castle.
It was not my castle, and
well,
my
we could call
dad
it
has
that.
since moved on. But yeah, sure.
But we could go back in time and you could relive it. So it's like going to your childhood home when you're old. Like you go back and you're like, oh, I remember this. That'd be kind of fun. Let's do an open source conference there. We'll hook that up.
As I must say, as a kid growing up on the premise of the castle, hosting like class parties or birthday parties at the castle in the dungeons and whatnot was really cool.
Oh, that would be cool. Yes, that would be most awesome. Yes.
Yeah, I'm very sick of downtown convention center conferences. We need to mix it up with something a little bit more interesting.
Yes. Actually, I just saw a thing where you can rent a train. And so you can all be on a train. So I think we should rent either a train or go to a castle. I don't know. We could figure that out. But Gary, I
was just going to say a hacking open source business community conference. Let us know if you want to do that. Let's put something together.
Yes,
to the audience.
Yes, it's all about the metrics. Yeah. All about the metrics. But Gary, so something led you from castle to open source metrics. And, you mentioned, kind of getting involved in the open source space, but you are one of the co-founders of the Chaos Project. And Chaos, a lot of people think Chaos, oh my God, Chaos magic from, the Avengers, Wanda, or they think Chaos, like, the program to, test and, your service meshes and destroy things. But Chaos in this case is a little different. Tell us about what the Chaos Project is, about that thing that you had started way back when.
Yeah, so Chaos is short for Community Health Analytics for Open Source Software. And it's a community that we started to bring together everyone in open source and industry and academia that is interested in measuring open source projects and communities and understanding the health of them. And it connects to my story from earlier when I was still next to the castle on my computer working on openoffice.org, which, by the way, living out in the countryside, I know what terrible internet feels like.
I would imagine that castle has really bad Wi-Fi. I'm just going to say that.
Yeah. Yeah, the walls being 2 meters thick, there's no penetration.
Oh my God. Yeah.
And it's solid stone. It's not like a wood frame or anything. So what happened was Oracle bought Sun Microsystems and gained the trademark to openoffice.org and was not cooperative with the community, like giving them a roadmap or a plan or letting them know what was going to happen. At least this is how I remember it. And so the community said, okay, we'll continue without Oracle, but we'll invite them to join anytime. We start the document foundation, be self-sufficient. We forked the project as LibreOffice, and the project continued. And that resiliency, that sustainability of the project community itself fascinated me. And so when fast forward, I was going for my PhD, I had the opportunity to really dive into one topic. And I was like, how does this open source community work? How does that work with corporations engaging in it? What is the health of a community? And this was at a time where more and more companies start to engage in open source. The Linux Foundation still had like 30 projects or so. Now they have way more than that. And so there was a lot of growing interest in this topic, and we did field research, engaging in open source communities, in projects, going to conferences, talking with people who are actually doing these things. And so measuring communities was a topic that came up time and time again. The research team that I was part of got a grant from the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation to dig in, and that's how we, from our side, were really able to invest into building a community around this topic, together with the Linux Foundation, with Bitergia, who was already doing this for more than 10 years. So yeah, that's how Chaos started, with the goal of helping build a common vocabulary and set of metrics and software that everyone can use for understanding the health of open source projects.
Now, we'll get into the metrics side in a second, but you mentioned that, starting the Chaos Project also got you involved with Bitergia, which is where you are now.
Yes.
Okay. And you are the director of sales at Bitergia.
Yes.
Okay. So what does Bitergia do? And maybe tell us a little bit about what the director of sales does.
So Bitergia provides metrics and analytics around open source projects, and taking a specific focus on the community. So who is involved? What is everyone doing? How are the processes going? Where are the bottlenecks? What are the organizations involved? So Bitergia has been working with foundations like Mozilla, Linux Foundation, Eclipse, and others, and also with companies and open source program offices to understand what is our footprint in open source, what are our teams doing, how are others contributing to our projects, is there fairness in the projects, or is there some bias in who has ownership or decision making? So there's a lot of different questions that we can ask about open source projects, and using metrics we can look at these at scale. And that was like when we started Chaos, Petrugia was the only company that did that. And we were very happy to work with them. Now, when I finished my PhD, they said, hey, Georg, come work for us. You have connections in open source. You can help us grow the business. And I said, but sales, I have this picture of sales being very cringy, and I don't like talking to salespeople. And I was like, I don't know if this is the right thing. But I changed my perspective on that. With sales is also education. And I'm an educator. I've taught classes. I like to explain things to people. I like to show them how to do something. And that's what sales is, where, especially in open source, I can authentically say, here, I know something. Would you like to learn from me? And then if you want to go further than what my capabilities are, I have a team that can do even more. But then, of course, to get their time, there's a price tag attached to that. But that initial conversation is always based on mutual respect, on learning from each other. And that's how I was able to say, yes, I can do sales in open source.
I think that's a very good insight about that transition into sales, that there's a big education component to it, because I think that a lot of entrepreneurs in the open source space go through this exact transition of, I'm an engineer, I'm a developer, whatever it is that I'm doing in, the open source world very specifically, and then transitioning to a business, like really grappling with that and kind of learning how you port all your skills over to that. And I think that education angle is a very natural way to kind of bridge over to that. I'm kind of curious, what were the other important learnings as you were really getting started and, kind of getting your bearings in the sales world that you think other entrepreneurial folks in the open source space can learn from?
So I'm still learning. It's a never-ending process.
Always.
And I still remember when I started, I was like, what's an SOW? What's a PO? All these acronyms with a statement of work, SOW, where we describe exactly what it is that we're going to do with the description, and then a price and specific boundaries of where does our engagement end. Like, we do this many hours, but then if it goes over, then we need to renegotiate, or there's a different price. And then purchase orders for large companies, they need to have their procurement process and different signs off internally, and learning how to navigate that. I'm still finding, I have one customer right now, we are 6 months into the renewal process, and their procurement process is still trying to produce the purchase order for us, and we still have not been paid. So there are a lot of hurdles along the way that even as we're building good relationships with our customers and everyone they work with, there's a lot along the way where it's just being tedious and persistent.
And have you found that as you have become more successful as a company and started to talk to larger companies, that sales process has increased, and now there's more work around the statement of work, there's more work around the legal and the procurement process, and it takes longer to get through that?
With larger corporations, yes, it is. And they always want us to use their master service agreement, their standard terms, and they're always written in a way that they favor our customers rather than us. So we always have to send it to our lawyers, and they edit everything and send back the red lines to make it more equitable and even and balanced for everyone involved. But what I'm also seeing is the more we do this, the more standard our contract becomes. We're trying to reuse the same building blocks in our contract. And that is working, but we're always finding new edge cases, and we're like, okay, we need to account for this. So, for example, we had one customer that wanted to do on-prem. And so we said, okay, yeah, we do it on-prem, no problem. We've done it a few times before. But then they could not give us access to their servers or provide VPN access. And then there was extra hardware we had to install. And it was 6 months project. After 6 months, we still did not have access, and we had to basically say, okay, this project is not going anywhere. We shut down. But so yeah, we are tweaking the language in the contracts as we learn along the way. One of the things that I'm experimenting with right now is multi-year contracts. Mm-hmm. So we have so far always done 1 year at a time with automatic renewal, which automated is not really automatic if you have to get another purchase order and have to again engage in the procurement process. So this year I started with the idea, okay, let's see if we can get like 3 years at a time. So we just got the first purchase order for 3 years, and we'll see how that goes. Hopefully it reduces our administrative overhead.
Now, is most of the product that Bitergia sells, is it a software or is it the services component? I'm curious.
So the software itself is 100% open source. So there's no licensing. Everything that we do is service. And we have two types of services. One is around the software specifically, with hosting it and operating it and managing it and updating it and making sure that if something goes wrong, we fix it for you. And basically providing it as the software as a service. And the other one is around consultancy, where we bring our experience with metrics and strategy and working in open source projects and communities to the customer to build out, okay, what are the metrics we want to be looking at? What are the decisions we want to support? How do we visualize that? And then most recently, in the last 2 years, we've also gone more and more into inner source with internal software teams that are working more and more like open source projects, with breaking down silos and changing the culture. In those teams, adopting a pull request workflow and so on. So yeah, exciting stuff happening.
I'm very curious in terms of the differences that you see, because the inner source thing I find very interesting in terms of you have these very mini, a very small version of a larger open source community, completely within an organization sometimes. And I'm really curious in terms of the metrics that you're seeing people want to track with any of these inner source solutions. What are you seeing as kind of the main differentiators there?
The metrics that we're asked about is a lot around software engineering practices, from velocity metrics around how long does it take us to get from scheduling work to getting it into a dev environment, to testing it, to fixing the bugs that we introduced, to getting it out of the to customers. Those are questions we're getting. But then when it comes to inner source specifically, it's a lot about culture change and collaboration. And one thing that we specialize in is who is doing what in these projects and what are they working on. And it's about, okay, who is creating a pull request, who is reviewing it. Are they from the same team? Are they from different teams? Are we looking at files being edited only by one team, or are the files being edited by multiple teams? So is there shared ownership? Do we have other departments contributing? So those are the metrics we're looking at to see, are we making impact in changing the culture and the way that these teams are working?
Now, is inner source really for larger companies, or are you seeing smaller companies do that as well?
The companies that we engage conversations in are larger companies that have established processes and practices that they want to change. Inner source itself as an idea, of course, is available to smaller companies as well. And because at the core, inner source is about developing software where it's transparent within the organization and anyone can jump in. You don't have silos. You don't try to create barriers, which really helps when you have a component that is used by other teams, or you have a framework that many different teams are relying on. And you don't need to escalate up and across and into other areas of the company. You can directly engage the engineers with each other.
One thing that I wanted to dig into here, because I when looking at Bitergia's website, saw that not only are you selling to companies, but you are also selling into OSPOs, you're also selling into open source foundations. And I'm very curious how the way that you think about the sales process itself, how are selling to these different kinds of organizations similar, different, harder, easier? I'm very curious kind of what that tends to look like. Because one of the things that really surprised me when we started doing some of these things at Scarf when dealing with open source foundations was like how slow they moved for how big they are. Like that proportion, my expectations were way off. And I think that other entrepreneurs in the open source space probably have similar surprises too. So as someone who's been doing this for a while now, how do you see these three different kinds of organizations, similar and different from a sales perspective?
One thing that works really well for us at Bitergia is to establish personal relationships. And especially at foundations, it comes down to having relationships with the foundation members, with the projects themselves, and having conversations about how having metrics about the projects can be beneficial and showing transparency, identifying new members, seeing if when we have an internship, whether those interns stay within one project or stay within the ecosystem of the projects that are at the foundation. And you cannot say any of these things without having the metrics, because you don't have insights to all of the projects. As a maintainer of a project, you might know who all the important people are in the project, but once you scale up and have many different projects, you just cannot handle that scale. And so, but that's with foundations, and with open source program offices, it's very similar. That it's we built up that personal relationship. We really show what the organization gains from being able to track, here is our engagement in open source, here is where our engineers are engaging, this is where we're having an impact, where we're influencing technologies, and an open source program office that is trying to be the central point for the organization and all the teams that are doing open source, be the knowledge center, provide services. That really becomes a service that the OSPO then provides to the other teams, to the managers, in helping to understand, hey, this is what we are doing. Here are teams that are doing it really well. Here are teams where we see improvement can be had. And so it's a way of also seeing where are the best practices, what can we learn from.
Oh, go ahead, Matt.
Nope, go ahead.
I was curious if you find that there's, I guess differences in things like, say, procurement. Like, do open source foundations tend to have very similar very robust procurement processes? Like you were mentioning, these really, really long, 6 months in, still don't have a whole lot. Like, do you find that foundations, you see a very similar thing there? Because I think what's interesting with the foundations is there's a lot of volunteers involved as well, where it may be harder to, really push and follow up constantly in these kinds of things because they might not be around all the time, or these kinds of things. How do you navigate that as a salesperson?
So with open source foundations, getting consensus from everyone, especially because there's volunteers involved, and then even if there's a board that makes decisions, they want to make sure that their stakeholders are okay. It also takes quite a while. But then when it comes to the actual contract or signing, it's much leaner than with large multi-country organizations that have gigantic mechanisms in place to manage all of their procurement and with all the checks and balances. Especially for on-prem, the security reviews that we go through with pages and pages and pages of Excel spreadsheets with questions on what controls do you have to make sure that if we let you into our data center, that you're not going to be a vector of attack for anyone. So there's a lot that companies put in place that are a lot of work.
So it's easier once you get the contract to go through the contract process with a foundation, but it takes longer to get to the point of a contract just to buy the consensus because everyone wants a say.
Yes. Yeah, with companies, sometimes we get lucky where they say, hey, I have this specific problem. Bitergia, you can help us. And the manager's on board, their manager's on board, the budget is there. And then we just have to work through the procurement process, which can take another 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months.
Yeah. And I know, Avi, this is a pain point that you've experienced in the past as well. And I think this gets back to what you were saying earlier, Georg, was it's about the relationships. And relationships don't happen overnight. It takes a lot of times months, if not years, in some cases, to build those relationships. And I've seen that from an open source perspective when, I look at where somebody starts to engage with a project to the point where they're willing to buy. In many cases, it could be 3 to 5 years. And, it's a process of getting comfortable not only with the software, but the people behind it.
Yeah. And the ones where I have the most fun in this process are the ones where they say, hey, I really see the value in this tool. I cannot convince my team, my managers to invest yet, but I'm going to deploy your open source software, manage it myself. And then after a year or two, they just say, it's too much work for me. Bitergia could do it much more efficient. And let's, then they get the buy-in after already showing how all these metrics are valuable to the organization to, again, free up their time and focus on other things. So being open source is really nice in this case because we can already provide value even without informal engagement.
It's really the original product-led growth model, if you think about it, because you deploy the product and the product, if it's good enough, you can generate sales off of it.
Like sometimes getting your foot in the door with a potential customer is one of the harder parts at the end of the day. And like the open source model just lowers that barrier of entry to get your foot in the door to very, very little, which is great. I think that's a very underrated aspect of that model.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, let's shift gears a little bit. And let's head over to the metrics side of things because I love my metrics. I do. And I know you do too, Georg. And Avi, you started a whole company around metrics as well. So I think we're all kind of metrics heads here. Yeah. Is that an official title? Maybe we should make that
it is now.
Metric heads. I'm going to get hats made. For metrics heads, and that would be fun. Yes, indeed.
We need to make a compilation of all the hats that Matt says he's going to make on this show. There's a lot of hats that are queued up, and I'd love to make all of them.
Well, I think we're all going to be at FOSDEM in a couple weeks, so I can bring some hats. I'll get some hats.
Yes.
Oh, you're going to be there too. Awesome. Great. Good. Cool.
I'll contribute scarves. We are bringing scarves from Bitergia.
Wait, Bitergia has scarves also? Oh, goodness, so do we. Oh, this is great. We can swap some scarves. Yeah, we can do a scarf exchange.
Oh
this is exciting.
Oh, it's a scarf exchange?
Very good.
This is crazy. This is crazy. And I'll bring hats. Yeah. Hats and scarves. And all you need is some mittens. But, there you go.
Yeah.
Anyway. Yeah, that slowed down weird. Right?
Sorry for that digression.
Brussels is cold in February, so it's all good to be bundled up.
There you go. So anyways, metrics, the metrics heads, here we are. And so I know that metrics here from a Bitergia perspective, where you started was very heavily focused on the engineering side of things. And, I'm curious, are there other metrics outside of the engineering side, outside of the contributor side that you're seeing that are important that maybe we don't have yet and maybe we should be looking at? I know, there's certain things that I look for, but are there things outside of just the contributor side that people should be paying attention to?
There is, and there is a lot we can look at and people have thought about looking at. And this is where it's really awesome that we have the Chaos Project, because now we have one place where we can collect all of these ideas and build out resources around them. So in the Chaos Project, I'll just start there, because if someone were to look for metrics, it's easiest to have a frame of reference that's already there and exists. And we have 5 focus areas of metrics, and they are around the value of a project, the risk in a project, the evolution of a project, diversity, equity, and inclusion in a project. So those are really high level categories that we have metrics in each of them. And then there are some generic ones where we just say, yes, there are different types of contributions, and we want to acknowledge all of them, because an open source project, like I said at the beginning, if it's only developers, we don't see the full picture of everything that is being done in open source, nor is it, there's a problem with overemphasizing the software development with metrics, because it's so easy to look at the log, the Git log, and all the commits that are made to edit the software. And we have the issues where, again, a lot of conversation is happening around contributions to the source code, bug reporting, feature requests. When it comes to like organizing events or helping newcomers and being on social media, it's much harder to have those kinds of metrics, but they're important to acknowledge. And so there are some ideas for how to do that, with encouraging everyone to like open an issue, say, hey, I did this. It doesn't really work that great. Sometimes it's just being in the community and recognizing those that we see every day and that have done awesome work in different ways, having the human component in that metric collection, if you want to call it that. It's really recognizing the contributors. But then you asked about not contributor-centric metrics. We can have metrics around, like risk is a huge topic that has gained a lot of attention in the last year, really, with SolarWinds, and ever since we had Heartbleed, where there is not just interest by users, companies, but now also government coming in and saying we need to regulate this somehow. And so metrics are starting to play a bigger role with test coverage and looking at who is contributing. Are there any contributors that are suspicious, and identities and trust in open source are becoming more and more like really hard to grasp and hard to put into metrics, but they're becoming more important.
So with these sets of metrics, I think the Chaos Project as a whole is obviously, the name very focused on the community portion of, what you are measuring when it comes to the health of an open source project. I think the business interest in having a healthy community is probably quite obvious to most. I'm curious where you see within those community metrics, what you see as being kind of the most important to look at from kind of from a business perspective. Where do you see? I mean, I think like risk obviously is a really great one. It makes a lot of sense that that's on the rise. What other of these sets of metrics, what do you think businesses really need to be looking at the most?
Depends on the scenario. Is it your own project that you are open sourcing and you have some business goal for your own software? Is it software that you're looking to utilize that someone else has developed and you want to evaluate, is this a good project to rely on and to build on? So depending on the use case, there are different metrics that I would look at, but the common denominator is just number of contributions and the activity in the project. Because, and this is something that I found in my PhD research, a healthy open source project has 3 things. One is quality source code. One is the resources to do development, and GitHub provides all of that almost for free for most projects. Most projects don't need more than what is already provided. But then the third one, and usually I list that as first, is an active community. Because without an active community, there's no development, there's no advancement in software, and technology moves so fast. If the software is not being updated and maintained, it'll be obsolete 1 or 2 years down the road.
So what do you think about projects like curl, for instance? Like where, you have a couple people doing a lot of the work. And I think and maybe I'm wrong with this, maybe I'm mistaken about kind of where these metrics would point, but like, I think where I'm getting at is there are projects, I think, that kind of tend to violate some of these general rules that we're saying of like, oh, you have a ton of different people, you really want to reduce the bus factor, the elephant factor, these kinds of things. But like, there's exceptions to that, I guess, as well. And how I'm kind of curious how, the chaos community thinks about that.
Yeah, I have spoken to maintainers of projects that are small but central, like curl, and similar projects like that. And what I'm hearing from the maintainers is that And this was part of a research project about resources, maintainer resources, and what it takes to have healthy projects from a maintainer perspective. And so in those conversations, what I learned is that even the projects that look like the work is done, they are fully developed, widely used in every machine, that we have the technology still advances and they need to maintain and update it. And there are new protocols coming out. There is new things that need to be supported. HTTP is advancing. There's always changes. And unless there is work being done on the software, it'll start to fail and break things. Even though they're trying to be super stable, and as users are upgrading from version to version, it doesn't break anything. And so, yes, even in those projects, they are looking for additional support. One of the big problems is they're written in languages that no one is interested in right now. They're boring languages, and that the projects don't get a lot of attention, even though they get wide usage. And so there's no fame to be had by working in these background projects. So that's what makes it really hard to attract contributors, even if it's a handful of 3, 4, 5 that come in and help out, that one maintainer that has all the burden.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of these that are kind of hidden issues where the exceptions to the rule, if you will, where you have not only these projects that are like that might have wide scale usage, but they also, you could have the opposite where you've got a pretty vibrant community, but it's a very narrow use case. And I think that we see from the commercial side, when we're talking about people who are trying to create open source for a commercial purpose, I've seen people who have really good community numbers, but they can't sell anything because people aren't willing to pay for it. It's like, who's going to pay for curl?
Yeah.
Right. You're just not going to. I mean, and everybody's going to use it. And so that becomes one of those challenges, I think, and really establishes itself. What is that viable pathway for some companies to hit the revenue side?
Yeah, I guess like there's almost some, any open source, how do I want to say this? Like any technology that you are building open source kind of moves towards commodifying that technology. Like you kind of make it, boring and commodified. And so once a project gets to that state, it's almost like the community metrics and your expectations of them shift and change a little bit and don't necessarily, or maybe you disagree with that, but like maybe they over time don't follow the same, not that they don't follow the same rules, but like the things that you are looking for might not be the same anymore once it becomes like like a curl, where it's just so baked into everything and it's so taken for granted that it doesn't necessarily matter in the same way anymore. I don't know.
I think it matters even more. So one of the things that we see in open source is the way we can collaborate on establishing standards, and having the software that becomes a commodity, becomes a standard that is just used everywhere in a uniform way, is lowering the cost and increases the compatibility and interoperability between our systems. And so it's a really amazing trend. It also leads to monopolies where not in a bad way. It's one project takes it all, basically, is what we're sometimes seeing. And so they become super critical to be maintained. But you're right. They become so commonplace and in the background that people just use them without even realizing that they're using it. And so it's not on the top of anyone's mind to support this. And so there are several initiatives to battle this. I don't like battle as a word because that involves like fighting and violence. But there are several ways to try to solve this. From a maintainer perspective, and this goes back to the research project that I did, there are some things that maintainers are doing. There are some who sell the project. I have talked to maintainers who literally have sold their copyright to a company that then does something else with it. There's also going into consultancy, where if you have like a component, we'll stick with the example you mentioned, curl. If you have a component like that is widely used, there will be companies implementing solutions on top of it and run into problems, and then building out a consultancy service around that to help them resolve issues that they come up with. I know of an example where a car manufacturer, or maybe it was not the manufacturer, maybe it was a supplier, had thousands of cars in the lot sitting because there was a software error. And they tracked down the developer of the component that was causing the issue. And they basically expected him to fly out today to fix it for them for free. I mean, those expectations are just not anywhere that is reasonable. So going into consultancy, you have other business around that as well, but specialize in that component where the maintainer is really good at. And that works for some. From another perspective, it's paying for your stack. There are some approaches to that where I know Tidelift and Libraries.io has a scanner for what's all in your open source stack. And then let's support those projects and communities where you pay a flat fee or whatever is determined to Tidelift, and then they pass it on to the maintainers and the projects. And there are other platforms that do similar things or tried similar approaches, but it's all in early stages right now, and it's more experimental because there are so many issues involved with detecting all of the open source that is in our stacks, identifying that, and then figuring out how do we actually pay maintainers, because they're all over the world, different legal situations, different currencies. How do we build this into something where the users, if it's a company, gets assurance? You know, you don't have someone to hold accountable for with an SLA or something. So there are lots of challenges involved in this, but I see some of the solutions being tested here and there, which is exciting.
Yeah, very much agree. Do we have time for one more, or should we go into the rapid fire questions?
We will give you the last regular question before I go into rapid fire mode.
Awesome. One thing that I think a lot of people who work on any kind of like metrics initiatives or projects is that you can sometimes see some really, really wild things out in the world in terms of what the data looks like when it comes back, when you actually start tracking these things. Does any story or experience jump out to you where you started, you say, implemented Bitergia somewhere, you start tracking these things and like, oh my God, what is this number? You really need to like dig in and find some surprising thing. Do any stories come to mind like that?
I have to think about that one.
If not, it's okay too.
I
Okay.
can't think of anything that's like super stunning.
For sure. We can cut that one out. Not a problem at all.
Yeah.
All right. It's time for rapid fire mode. Woo-hoo.
Yes.
Here we go. We're going to ask you a series of questions, and whatever comes to the top of your mind, feel free to answer. So the first one up is, what is the open source tool you use the most nowadays?
Firefox.
Firefox. Okay. And if you had to pick a favorite open source tool, what would that be? If it's different, it could be the same.
It's hard to pick. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
hard to pick a
LibreOffice.
favorite.
I thought you mentioned LibreOffice or OpenOffice. Like that would be your thing, go to. But that's okay. That's okay. So, what's your favorite book or movie?
I am a big fan of the Marvel movies, the cinematic universe.
Okay.
Huge fan.
Is there one in particular that you're a fan of the most?
Usually it's the latest, whichever I just last saw. They're all excellent.
Which one was the latest? I'm just curious. I haven't seen a couple of them lately, but
The Black Panther one.
okay.
The main actor was, unfortunately, it passed away, and so they reinvented that movie. And what really impressed me about this movie is how they built in that grief for losing that actor, because it's during that entire movie that you're grieving with the family, and it's so well done.
And so, so we saw earlier that you have Transformers in your background. What attracted you to Transformers?
It's I have several things on here that are all robot themed, and these were little tokens that I got as I was moving through my PhD program. For every milestone, my advisor gave me a robot, and one of them is the Transformer here.
I love that.
Oh,
That's
very
awesome.
cool. That's very cool. That's a very great story. Now, in terms of, like distributions, I know you said that you're running a Mac right now, but do you have a favorite Linux distribution?
My first one and always favorite will be OpenSUSE.
Okay.
Nice.
Fair enough. And, when we look at, the open source space right now, and we look at, we just passed the new year, right? Are there anything that you see that are exciting for the next year in the open source space that you're really excited about?
One thing I'm super excited about is the conference that the Software Freedom Conservancy is hosting in Portland is it in June? The FOSSI, the Free and Open Source Software Conference. Because it fills the hole that OSCON left when OSCON was discontinued. And I love the Software Freedom Conservancy and everyone involved in it because of the mission that they have and how they are helping open source along with fighting the legal battles and so on. I'm super proud of them for being recognized in a recent court settlement as the expert that will be consulted on whether the company is going to be compliant with the GPL license. So
very cool.
Exciting stuff happening there.
Yeah, was that Vizio? Was it a Vizio? Or I think it was a TV manufacturer. I think.
The Vizio is the company that they're suing right now.
Okay.
The settlement was with the chess software maker where they used an open source chess engine. Yeah.
Was it Chess 24? I don't remember which chess engine it was, but yeah, super interesting stuff.
And of course, speaking of open source, my next question is, what's your favorite ice cream flavor?
I had to switch that because it used to be cookies and cream, but now it's vanilla because I can't have cookies anymore. because of gluten.
That's tough. That's a tough one.
Yeah.
But vanilla's great. Can't knock
Yeah.
vanilla.
My favorite Superman ice cream, and most people don't even know what that is.
I don't know what that is. What is that?
I don't know what that is.
You'll have to look it up because it is awesome. It's a rainbow flavor, like it's rainbow flavored, rainbow colored. It's hard to describe. Most people don't know what it is. So, there is that.
I'll have to try some.
But okay, with that, we will end this. Georg, we want to thank you for coming today, chatting with us, telling us a little bit about, what's happening in your world and in the world of chaos. But, always awesome to have you on and to chat about these things.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. A great conversation. I love to see you at FOSDEM.
Yes.
See you very soon.
If you have time before, we have the Chaos Con the day before FOSDEM. So you're very well invited.
Oh, we will have to check that out.
Great.
Yes.
Yeah, we will have to take a look. Yeah, and for anyone listening that will be at either of those conferences, drop us a comment on YouTube. Get in touch with us. We'd love to chat.
Yeah, absolutely. And don't forget to like and subscribe, please.
Yes.
Smash the buttons. Smash the buttons.
Always.
All right. Until next time. See you, everybody.
Thanks. See you.